So in this lesson, we're going to be getting really creative with textures and adding textures and blend modes to our photos, which is going to give a whole different kind of effect. So one thing that I like to do is I'm constantly taking pictures of textures. So whenever I'm walking around, I'm looking at things like concrete or maybe telephone poles or rusty surfaces or crackled paint. So for example, here I have all kinds of different types of concrete, either painted or not, faded. This one is a picture of a baking pan or maybe wood that's got some texture or different types of surfaces. Here is a white painted fence with some crackled paint that leaves a different kind of surface in the middle. So these are the things that are great to put into your collection. They could be smoother or they could be rustier and grittier, just depending on different kinds of projects that are going to require different types of textures. So in these photos, on the top layer, I have a picture of a cement texture that has some graffiti on it, and I like this kind of thing as well. So that's the top layer, and then if I look down underneath, I have a picture of a girl on a hiking trail. And another thing that I do sometimes is I collect textures that are found near the other place where I'm taking the other photo that I want to combine them, so it kind of matches maybe what you're going to be doing. So on the top layer is my graffiti, as I said, and I'm going to be masking out part of it and blending it into the background layer. And down here, what I'm going to do is start by adding a boost of color to the bottom layer, and I will just go down and add an adjustment layer here, and I will add a hue and saturation adjustment layer, and then just kind of punch up the saturation a little bit here so that the grass looks a little bit greener than green and the sky looks a little bit bluer than blue. And then over here, what I want to do is to have the graffiti texture on the top. So I'm going to pull the graffiti texture back above that layer because I don't want the necessarily to have the saturation layer affected on the concrete texture. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start playing with some of my blend modes. So over here, you can look into the different blend modes. Now, typically the ones up here on the top, they're going to kind of darken it. And you can, basically what you need to do is just kind of cycle through and check them out. The next category here has lightening. So you kind of lightens things up. And then over here they have like overlays. And these are very harsh right now, but we can adjust this. And you just pretty much have to go through and try all of them and see which one works best. So most of the time I wind up using maybe multiply, something like multiply. And this effect is a little bit too strong for what I want. So one thing you can do is just go ahead and reduce the opacity. But you can also add, say, a layer mask to it so that it affects only part of the picture, so that maybe part of the texture is blended in, but the bottom of the picture, maybe I don't want the texture added. So what I'm going to do is create a layer mask on top of here. I just added 2 and I only wanted 1, and make sure that I'm there. And now what I'm going to do is go into my gradient tool, and I want to have one that is black to white, so that basically when you add black, you're getting rid of part of the mask. When you do white, you're adding to the mask. And that way I can just gradually fade it with a gradient so that it just gradually doesn't blend into the bottom of the photo. So then what I can do is start at the top and draw a line down. And this was actually the opposite of what I wanted. So I'll do Command Z, and then I'll start from the bottom and pull up. So now, as you can see, the texture is at the top of the photo and not necessarily at the bottom. It's kind of faded. And I can just keep going like that as well. So it's gradually fading into the back. And then here, if I wanted to, I could also go ahead and just paint on or off certain effects onto a layer mask by choosing the brush. And maybe I want one that's kind of like a medium-sized brush. And I'm going to choose the black. So if there's any other texture here that I want to get rid of, I can just paint it out. And then if you don't like it, it's of course very easy with this non-destructive type of editing to just flip back to the white and then paint the effect back on. So I can decide which one I like better. And if you can see over here in the thumbnail, you can see exactly where the black and white, where it's affecting it or not affecting it. Now here too, maybe I want to add some, change the color a little bit more. So I can go back into my hue and saturation here, and I might want to change, maybe adjust the color of the sky a little bit. So by tweaking with a hue, I can just make it maybe a little bit more of a turquoise color instead of a darker blue color. But as if you notice down on the bottom, I don't really like the orangey color that's coming in there. So once again, I can go over to my layer mask and I can choose my little brush and I can paint away the parts of the picture that I want to keep the color or keep the adjusted color or not. So if I just want it to maybe change the color of the sky, but maybe not to have this little orange section of the trail, I can do it that way as well. So as you can see, you can really spend as much time as you need to fine-tune your selections here. And next what we're going to do is add some doodles to the image as well. So it's kind of like adding some more little graffiti to the photo. And I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to draw some sun and some clouds in here. So it's kind of like a little mixed media type of effect. And I'm just going to go to my brush tool and I'm going to choose a nice kind of sunny yellow color for my sun. I'm going to press OK. And then I want to make my brush small. And I've created a new layer button for this, so if I don't like it, I can always tweak it later. And over here, I'll just draw myself a little sun. I think that's too small, so I'm going to do Command Z to undo. And I'm going to bump up the size of my brush. So I've drawn myself a cute little swirly sun. Maybe I'll add another little layer to that. And now on top of that, I'm going to add a little glow to it. This time I'm going to be using a soft brush. So the same brush, I'm just going to reduce the hardness down to 0 and up the size of it, and then paint myself in a little glow. And I did this on a new layer so that I can have separate controls over for different effects. So right now I'm going to just reduce the opacity to that, so it just kind of gives a little like faded paint look to here. And then back on my sun, I realized I want some rays, so I can put that down again and draw myself little doodling some rays onto my sun. Okay, so next I'm going to do kind of repeat the same process where I'm going to be making some clouds. So first what I can do is choose a white brush and up the size of my brush a little bit, and then I can paint myself in. Let's see here. Now actually I wanted it to do a fluffy look, so I'm going to make the 0 hardness. So I've made myself a cute little cloud here, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity once again, so it kind of blends into the texture and blends into the color underneath. And it almost looks like I really painted it on the concrete, that it was actually part of the concrete. And then I'm going to add a new layer for the cloud outline. And now I'm going to make my brush hard again and move it down here. And then I'm going to add a nice little outline. So it gives it a little bit more of a childish look to it. Now if I wanted to save myself some time, I'm going to go ahead and flatten the layer of the cloud outline with a little puffiness. So I'm going to merge down so I can combine the outline. And I could actually just duplicate this cloud by dragging this onto a new layer button. And then I can just move it over. And maybe to make it look a little bit different, I can do Command T to transform my cloud. And I can always change the opacity. So you can have a lot of fun with doodling and adding textures to the photo here. So as you can see, you can get really creative with textures, and I challenge you to go out and start your own texture collection. So from bricks to concrete to rusty surfaces to faded wood, you can use them to blend them with your photos and do some creative compositions. And also to go ahead and try doodling on top of your photos too. So have fun with it. In this lesson, we're going to be doing surreal types of type of imagery, and we're going to be playing with things to create unrealistic scenes that you can really just stretch your imagination to make. So I've got several different images here, and one thing you can do is use several different images to tell a story, but you can also combine several different images into one. So here I have a picture of a man on top of a ladder with the sun in the background, so it's creating a nice silhouette, and he's throwing his hat. And I'm going to make kind of like an interesting surreal type of wind effect by applying a liquefy filter to it. And notice I made a copy of my background just in case I make a mistake and I don't like something. I'm going to go up to my filter menu, and I'm going to choose the liquefy tool. And this one is a lot of fun to play with. You can adjust your brush size, and I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in, and I can start swirling the sky right on top of the photo. So I can make some interesting circular types of swirls. And if you get too close to the edge, it will pull the image down. So you want to make sure that if that happens, you can just fix it. And I can go around, and I can kind of wiggle the sky a little bit. And I can just work around in different areas of the photograph, being careful not to mess up with my hat here. Maybe make this one a little bit bigger so it kind of mixes the colors and liquefies them in together. And then when I'm happy with it, I can press OK, and I've got myself a nice swirly sky. And I've noticed that there's a little piece over here, but maybe if I turn on my background layer, it will hide that little imperfection. So next one I want to do is I want to take this hat from this photograph, and I want to put it into my final composition with my final hat. So over here, I'm going to be dropping it into here, because this man eventually is going to be flying through the sky. So I'm going back to my hat picture, and I can go ahead and maybe duplicate this one more time just in case. And I'm going to go to my magic wand tool, since I'm doing magic in here as well. And another thing that's great about silhouettes is it's really easy to make selections. So I just go ahead and click on that. I'm going to turn off these background layers so I can see exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to select the inverse because I want to delete everything else except for the hat. And I could just press delete it like that. I'm going to do Command D to deselect. So now I have my hat over here, and I want to move that to the other photo. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose my lasso tool, and I'm going to select around my hat, and I'm going to do Command C to copy my hat, and I'm going to put this into the other photo. I'm going to go now over to my other file of my umbrella boy, and I'm going to put a new layer. I'm going to call this hat, and I'm going to go ahead and Command V to paste my hat in there. And I kind of like just where it landed, and it looks kind of small as though it's flying off into the distance. And I can reduce my opacity to make it kind of create the illusion more that it's off into the distance. And adjust it just so. Now I'm going to go on to my next photograph, and this one is of the suitcase. Once again, I can duplicate my background layer just in case I make a mistake. And this time I'm going to select the suitcase, and I'm going to add that into the other composition as well. Once again, I can use my magic wand tool. But before I do that, one thing that makes selections a little bit easier is if I can go ahead and just make a really rough selection over here, not trying to make it perfect. And I'm going to select inverse once again, and then delete it. And Command D once again to deselect. So that way it makes it easier. So if I have a selection, the magic wand tool doesn't work perfectly, it makes it a lot easier to clean it up later. And I'm going to go ahead and erase parts around it that can be problems later. Once again, using my bracket tool. And I'm just going to kind of erase off of his hand, right just around this handle, and make it a little bit more curved. Maybe I did too much there. And once again, always like zooming in if you want more detail. So I just want to make it rounded so it just looks like the top of the suitcase handle. Command Z if you do too much. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller so I can get more detail. And then I'm going to go here where his hand is and just hand erase this little part. And the other thing too is you don't have to worry too much about details on this because this briefcase is going to be a lot smaller later on. So it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. So I get that, and now I'm going to use the magic wand tool just to get rid of the rest of the sky here. Selecting the magic wand tool, clicking on there, pressing delete, maybe doing it one more time, pressing delete, Command D to deselect, and it looks like I have a really clean selection now. Once again, I'm going to use my lasso tool because I'm going to move this over into the Umbrella Boy photo. So I'm just going to circle around here because once again I'm going to copy this photo and add it in there. So one more time, Command C to copy it. I go back to my Umbrella Boy and always remembering to make a new layer. And I'll call this my briefcase or my suitcase. And then I'm going to do Command V to paste my suitcase on there. And I can do Command T because I'm going to make it smaller. And I can plop this anywhere in the sky that I want because he's going to be flying. And once again, reducing the opacity. So I have one more picture that I'm going to add to this composition, and this one is going to be the man flying. So right now he's on top of a ladder, but we're going to get rid of the ladder. And once again, I'm going to duplicate my background layer just in case I make a mistake. Make sure I'm on that top layer. And I will begin by just making a really rough selection to get rid of the major part of the photo. Once again, selecting the inverse, deleting that, and I can turn off my background layer so I can see it better. Command D to deselect. And I want to get rid of the background, so maybe I can just grab my eraser tool. And this one will take, it's a little bit trickier. It'll take a little bit more time, so take your time. So I just kind of want to smooth it over so that the ladder kind of blends in so that at least it stays with the shape. So even though the ladder is on top, it's kind of hiding that he's on the ladder. And you can take your time with this. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab the magic wand tool again, and I can go around and delete bits of this. And you want to really make sure that you take your time deleting all these little stray pixels. But once again, later on, he's going to be smaller and a little bit faded, so you don't have to worry so much about it. And I see another little spot in here that I need to get rid of. Command D to deselect. And now I have this problem of the ladder showing. So what I'm going to do is add one more layer on top, which I can then later flatten. And I'm going to add a little black in here to paint over the ladder that's showing. You can always use the ink dropper tool if you're worried about getting the exact color, but I think it's pretty black. And then I'm just painting over the ladder so that I can get a nice silhouette. So I'm hiding my ladder here. And once again, I'm going to layer, I'm going to merge down so I can combine my black with him. And one more time repeating the process. I'm going to use the lasso tool, which I'm going to later copy. And just in case there were any stray pixels that were left over outside of here, if I make a little tighter lasso in on him. So I got him here. I'm going to once again copy by Command C, and I go back over to my umbrella photo, add one more new layer, and I'm going to call him the Flying Man. And Command V to copy him in here. He's way too big. I also see a little bit of stray pixels here, so I'm just going to go in and get rid of those. And I'm going to do Command T to make him smaller. Make him a lot smaller because he's going to be kind of like way off into the sky, flying away. And just find just the right position. When I'm okay, I can press the check tool, and I'm going to reduce my opacity to create the illusion that he's a little bit far off. And there I am finished. He's dropped his hat and his briefcase, and he's off flying away. Okay, so now is to the fun part. I've got all of my different items in the composition set in place, and I'm going to go ahead and add the swirls again to this to keep with the theme. So I'll go into my filters, go to liquify. It pulls up my liquify, and maybe I'll use the brackets to make the brush a little bit bigger or smaller, and I can go ahead and create some more swirls into the sky. And we can add some bigger swirls, and I can add some smaller swirls, but you're getting the idea that there is a magical type of powerful wind in. And then down here, I'm going to add some little waves to the clouds. And as you can see, the little boy has got quite a look of surprise on his face because he wasn't expecting this. Okay, and I think I like it. I'm going to go ahead and press OK, and it adds the swirls right into my composition. So as you can see, you can do a lot of creative, imaginative things with surreal scenes. And if you have any questions, go ahead and post them to the platform. In this lesson, we're going to be taking pictures and turning them into paintings. So we'll be working with different brushes that are like the paint mixer brush. So in my first photo here, I have a photo that I took using a long exposure setting. Now you can easily do this on your DSLR, or you can also get apps for your phone that would imitate the same effect. And typically when I use these kind of photos, I will take pictures of movement. So for example, children running on a beach, or any kind of maybe a Ferris wheel moving around, or people running, any of those kind of things will produce this kind of dreamy effect, and that starts as a great base for turning a photo into digital painting. So even if you're not a painter, you can still achieve this effect easily with photos. Now over here in my layers palette, I've made a copy of my original background photo, and just in case, I do this a lot, just in case I make a mistake and I want to start all over again, it's easy too. And I'm going to go over to the toolbar over here, and nested underneath my paintbrushes, I have the mixer brush tool. So I'm going to click on that, and as you can see, the brush comes up here in this little diagram, and over here, when I click on this, I have a whole bunch of other choices of different brushes that I can use for the mixer brush. And you can just try different kinds and see which ones work and see which ones you like for, you know, what kind of effect that you're trying to achieve. And also, when I'm gonna actually start painting on top of this photo. And so before I get started, what I usually do is go over to the little ink dropper tool to choose my color. So when I click on that, and then if I go over to my photo over here and click somewhere in there, it will pull up the color. So up here in my color swatches, the color that shows up is the one that matches the one in the background. And you can also adjust this a little bit so you can get more mixing. So I can maybe pull that down so there's more colors mixing, and then I can press OK. And then going back to my brush, my mixer brush tool, I get this. Now, if you notice up on the top of the toolbar, I have some menus up here, and I would just say my best advice is to go ahead and play with how much you want it to be mixing in with the original photo, how wet you want the brush to be, so it's imitating the feel of a real paintbrush. And you can just play with these sliders and see which one works best. I kind of like a more powerful effect to get a more abstract type of feel to it. So I'm really upping these sliders near the top, and you can always change and adjust as you go. So now what I do is I just, basically start painting right on top of the photo. And as you can see, it's making it very subtle up here on the top, making it look more like I've painted the picture as opposed to it being a photo. And you can take your time with this, just filling in all around. So here I'm just painting in the sky. Now, as you get in closer to other things, you can always use the bracket tools to adjust the size of your brush so you can get more detail. But you do want some sort of consistency. And it's okay if you, brush over something else because it creates a more abstract feel to it. And it depends on really what kind of look you're trying to achieve. So maybe you want it to make it look more abstract, maybe you want it to look more realistic, but since these ones I'm using long exposure, I'm looking for a little bit more of an abstract feel. So as you move into separate sections of the photo, you're going to want to go ahead and re-choose the color by going back to the ink dropper tool. And maybe I'm going to choose like a darker shade of blue over here for the water. Go back to my brush. And start working on a new section. And then once again, I'm going to choose the people over here. So I'm going to choose a much darker color. He's got a blue shirt in. I want to kind of emphasize the blue. And if you see the colors changing over here in the color swatches. So it mixes the color that you choose with the color that you're painting on top of. And maybe I want to add a little more blue over here too. And this boy's got a red shirt, so I'm going to add some red into it. And you don't necessarily have to stick with the colors that are in the photo. You can change it up a bit if you want, and it will mix whatever color you choose into it. And just take your time working around the photo. Okay, and then when you're happy with the effect that you're going to use, you also have the option of adding a little bit of texture to it, as I really love using textures here. So I have a photo of a faded red concrete, and I'm going to go ahead and make this bigger. I'm going to use Command T to transform the layer, and I'm going to hold the Shift button down because this picture is a different size than my background layer. And I can stretch it like this and then press the check mark over here. If I want, I can scooch the photo using the Move tool to where I want to put it. And since I don't want to have the red showing, I just want to maybe desaturate the red, I'm going to go ahead and add an adjustment layer just to my faded red concrete. So I'm going to go down to the bottom and I will add a hue and saturation adjustment layer and then go ahead and desaturate the photo so it's black and white. And then what I'm going to do is merge the hue and saturation layer onto my faded concrete because I want to have that blended in with the layer underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these ones off, and I'm going to do layer and then merge visible. So it's combining these two layers together. Now I've turned my background copy on again, and I can go ahead and cycle through the blend modes looking for one that looks good. And of course you can also just reduce the opacity to have a more subtle effect. And that's about it. So here's another example of using the same process on another photo. And I'm not a painter, but I can easily transform the photo into a beautiful painting. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate my layer. So just in case I make a mistake, I can easily go back. And now I'm going to go down to the bottom of the layers palette and add a new layer. And one of my favorite little effects is to add a little vignette around it. And we're going to be using brushes and mixer paint tools again. And this helps to kind of blend the colors together to add this as well. So I'm just going to use the paint bucket tool, choose a black, and paint bucket myself a black layer. Then I'm going to reduce the opacity, and you can just kind of adjust it to what you want. And then I'm going to grab my eraser tool and a big soft brush. And then I can go ahead and just kind of paint a little bit in the center, like a round circle, to kind of add to the lighting effects here. And maybe up my opacity just a little bit. Okay, next I'm going to add another new layer, and I typically do this a lot just in case I make a mistake. It's easier than if you're painting directly on the picture. And I'm going to call this my outline layer. And since we're going to be mixing this bright red color with a little bit of black, it really helps. And I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and I'm going to choose a brush with an erodible tip, and I'm going to just be drawing in black, kind of tracing around the edges. So I'm going to use my bracket tool to make it just a little bit bigger. And once again, you can choose your opacity or flow, or if you want it to be pressure sensitive or not. And just kind of very lightly sketching around the outline of the photo. If you make a mistake, you can easily just do Command Z, back up a little bit, or you can also just erase it. And I'm using the pressure sensitivity, so I'm just doing kind of like a light little outline. And where it's darker, I can kind of just add a little bit more here. It just creates the illusion of a little bit more depth and makes it look a little bit more like a painting. And you can take your time working around the edges here. Now later on, we're going to be kind of mixing this in. And she has a little bit of blue in her shirt, and I kind of want to stick with a red and black theme, so I'm going to paint over that. And so I'm also adding a little bit of shading where I see a little bit of dark in the creases of her hood. And I can also add a little bit of black to her hair while I'm at it. So next, what I'm going to do is go ahead and merge these layers down with the original photo, because I'm going to be mixing the colors all together. And I can do this by, I'm going to just go ahead and turn off the background layer in case I need that one. And I'm going to do layer, and since I turned that one off, I'm going to merge the visible layers into one. And now what I'm going to do is go over to my brushes again, go to my mixer brush tool, and I'm going to choose like a type of paintbrush one. And then once again, you want to look up here for the settings, and since I'm going to look for more of a painterly effect, a stronger effect, I'm going to have the settings high, but you can adjust however you need. So I can start by working around the edges, and also you want to use the little ink dropper tool to choose a similar color. And if I'm working in a larger area, I'm making my brush a little bit bigger. So as you get around the edges and you want to get more closer to the edges, it's a good idea to go ahead and zoom in. And if you do that, you're going to find that you're going to get better results. Okay, so now I've done my background. I'm going to work on her actual hood. So I'm going to switch over to a deep red color and then back to the same mixer brush. And then I'm going to be going ahead and kind of mixing the outline, which kind of adds a little bit more depth to the edges. Okay, so then it's also, good maybe to go ahead and toggle over to the black if I want to add in a little bit more black color into the mix. So now I've done large sections of the red, and now I'm going to focus on her face, where I'm going to want a little bit more subtle of effects so that I can kind of maintain her features. And also don't be afraid to zoom in close on certain areas. So I've got her face here, and I'm going to choose the eyedropper tool again. And you're going to have to kind of check to see what color is going to work best. I'm going to go ahead and maybe reduce the mix and the load and the wetness of the brush, and I can just test it. Now I actually think that this color is a little bit too light, so maybe I'm going to try again, choosing a little bit darker of a color. And I want more subtle of effect too, so I'm going to reduce the flow too. And now it has kind of a softer feel to it. And then you can readjust the color as you get into like darker or lighter parts of her face. And also the size of a brush when you get into finer details. And over here, there's a light. So I want to choose a lighter skin shade for that part. And if I zoom in, I could see that I've missed certain areas, so I'll go back some more. And you also don't have to apply the effect to the entire photo. You could leave little sections as the photo, kind of blending the painting into the photo. Just depends on what kind of look you're trying to achieve. And once again, as I'm zoomed in, I'm seeing little sections that I've missed, so I can just go back over and get those areas. And then I can zoom back out, and I think I'm happy with this. So let's see what you can do with a mixer brush tool and turning photos into paintings. Go ahead and post your photos to the platform when you're done.